All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on our second day of spring breakouts. My name is Michelle Thornton, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Business, and I'm our current Accessibility Fellow Coordinator. Joining me today is Kate Percival. Kate, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Kate Percival. I'm the Digital Accessibility Analyst here on campus. I do quite a few of these types of trainings, and I am responsible for remediating quite a number of online documents.
Great, thanks. So each day during spring breakouts this year, the work group on accessibility practices is offering one or two different sessions on digital accessibility. And today's focus is on emails. So we are going to be giving you a few kind of examples of what not to do, and then talking through how our 5 basic principles of accessibility apply in the email space. And we hope to give you lots of examples, things to take a look at, answer questions. And the one thing I do want to mention is that we're going to really be focused right now on the Gmail space. Although towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about using email through Blackboard. But we are less versed in all things like Outlook or AOL. So I will just put the caveat up in front that we are definitely biased in this space. But obviously Gmail is what we use on campus. So that's our main focus. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of Gmail and how it interfaces in other places later on. You can go ahead. So email obviously is one of our biggest tools for communication. We are sharing all sorts of information with our students, with our colleagues over email. And if our end goal is to try and get that information easily received by the people that we're sending it to, we need to understand that each person that it's going out to may have challenges receiving that information that we are not, aware of. 1 in 4 adults in the United States have some type of disability. This could be physical. It could also be a cognitive processing disorder. It could be something specifically related to vision or sight, where they are using some type of assistive technology or a screen reader. But the bottom line is that we just don't always know. Right. And this is especially true when it comes to our students. Only about a quarter of students that have a disability disclose that information when they're at college. And that's either disclosing it to professors or even to folks like the Office of Accessibility Resources. So we, I think, can fully anticipate that there's a good chance that at some point in time, email communication that we send out is going to be received by somebody that may be processing that information in a way that's different from how we do. And as a result, I think it's incumbent on each of us, if we want that information to get to the end user, that we try and craft them in such a way that makes them more, I would say, genuinely accessible across the board. So you can go ahead, Kate. We have all, I think, seen emails come to our inbox, right? We get tons of them each week, and some of them can look a little wonky. I believe in this email right here, this person is doing their best, right, to catch your attention, to try and highlight information that they feel is important. And if you're somebody that sees color easily, while this might be annoying to see all caps shouting at you and different colors, we get the point, right? The person is trying to highlight when the thing is happening. This may not be the best approach to that, but where it becomes really problematic is that if you have somebody who is using a screen reader or doesn't differentiate color easily, the things that they're trying to notate here in this particular email are not necessarily coming through. One other just note I want to make, they've got something underlined here in this email, and that's kind of become a general notation for that. If something's underlined in a digital communication, you should be able to click on that and it'll take you somewhere with more information. And that is not what is happening here. I'm going to give you a couple other examples of what not to do with some bad options here. Go ahead and on to the next one, Kate. All right, well, this one, in addition to being a fuzzy image, which is also not ideal, I think you can see right away that whether it's the punctuation, the fact that everything's all jammed together in one paragraph, the weird subject line. Like we might think that this one is actually spam when we first see this coming into our inbox. But overall, it's hard to look at quickly and understand what's happening here, what's the most important information, or even just to read it. The last thing I'll note about this one that really kind of bugs me, right, is that in two different places, we've got web addresses or an email address that are fully spelled out. And so in the first one, it's not even a clickable link. So those also would be seen as kind of less than ideal approaches for sharing that information. This one is, let's be clear, this is a fake email that Kate crafted as a bad example sent to me. And a couple things that just to note in this one. First off, again, the subject line is a little bit vague. Join us. We don't necessarily know what she's talking about. And that vagueness continues into the body of the email by just saying, please see the attached flyer. We don't really know if that's something we should click on or not, or we should open, right? It doesn't tell us what we're going to be learning about in that attachment. The choice of color is a little bit questionable. And then more problematically, she shared with us here this image that would be in the attachment, which while it's a lovely flower, it creates a really hard to read flyer with the text over it that there's just not a lot of contrast. So we'll come back to Kate's summer picnic luncheon email later on with maybe a better way to approach this, sharing this information. So here's the thing. If you've come to any of our other sessions, whether it was the 10-day accessibility challenge in the winter or other SELT sessions, you know that we have been hammering home this idea of 5 basic accessibility principles. If you haven't been to any other sessions, don't worry, we're going to get you caught up on all of them today. But essentially what we're going to be doing is thinking about these principles, but specifically in the context of email communication. So as a reminder, the 5 things we kind of think about when it comes to digital accessibility are identifying and structuring content types to make it easier to see what we're talking about or useful for a screen reader to navigate through. Providing text equivalents for things like images that are going to be provided. Being cautious and careful with how we use color. The importance of descriptive hyperlinks in documents or emails. And then one that really is I think critical when it comes to email, and that is using clear language. So if you think about this then in the context of an email, we're actually going to flip the order of these a little bit. You can go on to the next slide, Kate. And try and highlight the things that we think come through. We'll talk about all 5 of them, but we're going to spend our most time on the first 2. And so that would be thinking about clear and simple language, as well as the content types within the email. But we'll touch on all of the 5 different principles. So Kate's going to get us started, and she's going to focus on clear and simple language. And that's going to begin with the first thing that most of us write in an email, which is the subject line. So Kate, go ahead, take it away.
All right, thanks, Michelle. Of course, emails are a major form of communication, right? Like we all get a lot of emails every day. So how do you determine what emails to look at first? Generally speaking, you usually read the subject line. You'll check on who it's from, and that will help you determine whether you actually want to open that email or not. And then once you open the email, for me personally, I kind of take a look at the look of the email to see if I really want to continue and dive in once that's opened, or if it doesn't seem really relevant to me at that moment. The subject line acts as a title to the email. It should be succinct, clear, concise, meaningful. It should describe the purpose of the email, and you want to try to avoid all caps and punctuation. You don't want it to seem like you're yelling at people. You want to try to get their attention with the subject line in the most direct way possible. So what are some examples of bad subject lines versus good subject lines? If you have a couple in mind, you're welcome to throw them in the chat. Michelle already gave us a couple of really bad subject line examples. Some of the ones that I kind of pulled out are the attention, all caps, exclamation point, the world is ending, hurry up, pay attention now. Again, this was one that Michelle highlighted, hello dear, or just hello, hi Kate, something very vague, like I have no idea what it is when I'm opening, if it just is that hello attention. The marketing ploy, hurry, time is running out. Do it now, get online, hurry, spend money. And then the last one, again, Michelle highlighted this as well, very vague, join us. These examples, these 4 examples to me just scream spam. And when I receive emails that have these types of subject lines, I might click on them to open them depending on who they're from. If I don't recognize who it's from, chances are I'm just going to straight up delete them and not even open them, not even look. So again, you want to get the reader's attention in the most direct way possible. So on the right-hand side of the screen, the good examples, STC registration is open. STC stands for SUNY Technology Conference. That is a conference that I'm very interested in. In fact, I'm going to be speaking at that conference, so I need to register for it. So that is very informational to me. That tells me that there's information within that email that I'm going to need to know in order to register for that particular conference. Tuesday's meeting agenda. This is slightly vague. You could put what meeting it's for. However, most people, when they know they have a meeting coming up, they'll read the agenda before the meeting. So even if you don't open this email until 5 minutes prior to the meeting, it has some sort of context and it tells you that there's something important within that email. If you know you have a meeting coming up on Tuesday, you're probably going to want to look at that agenda and open that email and see what else is going on. Apply for the TIP grant by June 13th. Again, the TIP grant is, if this is something that I'm knowledgeable of, if it's something that I'm interested in or aware of, it's telling me that I have a deadline. So if I want to apply for this, I need to open this email and read through the details and follow the instructions in order to get that application in by the time it's due. And then the last one, employee luncheon. Again, slightly vague, but as an employee of the organization, if I get an email titled employee luncheon, chances are I'm going to click on it, I'm going to open it, see what the details are. When is it? Can I go? You know, all that. So there's at least enough context within these very short subject lines to provide me with a few more specific details that make me want to open the email and find out what else what other information is in there. So in the same way that you want to be direct with the subject line, you also want to be very direct and concise with the body of the email. And you want to write in clear and simple language in order to get your point across. There's this concept called the inverted pyramid. And I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this, but this was a technique that originated in 1845 from print material. This method allowed the reader to get the most important information first. In print, newspapers and articles, journal, magazines, that type of thing have very set, specific, limited amount of space. If a newspaper article needed to be cut, it was generally cut from the end, usually with very little regard for what was actually written at the end of the article. So this concept suggests that you start with the conclusion and then build on how that conclusion was reached. So at the very top, we have a diagram, an image of an upside down triangle. At the very top is the most newsworthy information. You start off with the foundational questions: who, what, where, when, why, and maybe how. Next comes the details that support that initial information. And then you end with the other general background information. This tends to be the least important. It's the easiest to cut and you can get rid of it and your article or communication still retains the meaning. So while this particular concept originated and applies to print material, it's also very applicable in the digital realm. With the amount of emails and general material that we consume every day, we are not going to read every word of every email, right? We skim from the top to the bottom. And if we're really lucky, we might actually make it all the way to the bottom of all of the emails. Chances are we're going to stop somewhere in the middle or maybe even at the top, depending on what we can assess. So this means that the most important information needs to be upfront. It needs to be first. So in order to do this, there are some writing style guidelines. You want to write in short sentences. You want to stick with concise ideas. Try to avoid the jargon and acronyms, and I'll expand on that in just a second. Keep your text to small chunks and try to limit one idea or concept per paragraph. So doing these things provides some clear language and it will allow people to understand the information the first time they see or read or hear it. This will help a wide range of audiences, including non-native English speaking people, people with cognitive disabilities, helps reduce the cognitive overload. And again, just for people who are busy, who are skimming through emails, it helps get the information right away rather than spending numerous hours reading through emails that may or may not have anything important to say. So little disclaimer, we've had some questions come up about this before when we've talked about clear language. Disciplinary content should be specific. We are not suggesting to dumb down any of your content. However, general communication should be much broader. This allows people to understand if they're in the right spot. It helps people understand if the communication pertains to them. It gives them a broad overview of the purpose of your email or communication. So I'll have just a couple, or just a quick example. This comes from the website plainlanguage.gov/examples, which is a fantastic little website. It's a lot of fun if you have a few minutes to go check it out. The passage on this slide says the student applicant should submit an official copy of his or her transcript, 2 letters of recommendation from professors, a statement of financial need, and a short biographical statement to our grants office by April 15th. So you want to know what I retained from that? I retained to our grants office by April 15th. That's all that I remember. There's a lot of information packed into one sentence. It's a little bit difficult to read. It's kind of cumbersome. It's difficult to separate out and a little difficult to remember. And if this passage were included in a longer email and I was searching for this information, I would skim right over it. Chances are I would not stop to see this information. So a better way to present this would be to apply, submit the following items to our grants office by April 15th. And then we have a bulleted list, an official copy of your transcript, 2 letters of recommendation from professors, a statement of financial need, and a short biographical statement. So again, this separates the items out so it's easier to read. The wording is more direct. If I'm skimming through things, my eyes are going to stop on the bulleted list. So it's going to be much easier to find this in a longer passage. So it's just a little less cumbersome to get to. And Michelle now is going to talk a little bit more about the concepts of chunking and separating out your content.
Thanks, Kate. So I think that Kate gave us a really good foundation of understanding the content in our emails. And what I want to spend a little bit of time thinking through with you guys is then once those get put into a space where somebody's going to be consuming that information, if they are using a screen reader, if they have an information processing disorder, how we can structure that in the actual body of the email in a way that's going to make it easier for them. So if we know and we just anticipate people are going to skim the emails, I think it's important for us to kind of think about then how we can help that, right? Okay, you can go into the next slide. So the concept of chunking, right? If you remember that first kind of bad email that we saw that, or the second one that I shared that had kind of everything all jammed together, it's just hard to even make that desirable to read through. So by chunking or breaking kind of large amounts of information into smaller pieces, it helps us identify what concepts that we're going to be anticipating to look through. I almost think about it like having a table of contents, right? But you would never do that for an email, right? For an email, there's not going to be, pages and pages, hopefully, but it still kind of gives those similar cues where we can understand what part of the email has the information that we are looking for and needing. And that really just kind of helps your cognitive overload as you're going through the information. So this is another example. We've got, I don't expect any of us to read this in the time that we have here, but you can get the basic perspective that just looking at this on whether it's a PowerPoint slide in this case, or if it was an email that you received, you're like, oh God, that's really, kind of an intense amount of information. This is basically what we're talking about here is helping people understand what digital accessibility is and why it's important. If we were to do this in a way that's chunked, we can look at that on the next slide. And what you'll see is a very easy and approachable version of this, right? So we've got sections that are highlighted with headings, the types of disabilities, the factors involved are in a bulleted list, and all that same information that was in the prior one dense paragraph is now separated out in a way that feels different, even just looking at it. So when you're thinking about this in the context then of an email, let's get to the actual like kind of tactical skills on the next slide. I think that we can kind of think through. This is just a screenshot of a Gmail window open where you are going to be crafting an email. And much in the same way, if you're familiar with using Word, there's a lot of similar features in Gmail. Essentially, this goes back to Kate crafting her employee luncheon email. And what she's trying to share with everybody is the menu items. And essentially, she wrote down everything that's included. You can highlight that. And then in the bottom right corner, we've got circled here the sort of universal sign for turn this into a bulleted list. And that's the couple of dots and the lines next to it. Looks a little bit like Morse code, but the general idea is that you're going to see this image anywhere, and that's going to very easily then allow you to convert a list of items into those clear bullet points. When you do it through this way, as opposed to a lot of us use workarounds, right? Like sometimes you will like asterisk things and like try and make it yourself. But if you use the tools that are available to you, then assistive technology like a screen reader knows that this is a bulleted list. It's given the cues so that if it is reading this information to a person that has a visual disability, then they have the ability to understand that this is listed out and that these are all part of the same item, which is telling us what's on the menu for the luncheon. So you can see kind of how we've redone Kate's email to me. We've got the better subject line here. The information is available within the body of the document. And it's really clear and easy to see what's going on. So we've got that bullet pointed list. There's just black text. Everything is easy to read. You can kind of consume this information quickly and there's nothing to worry about. I want to spend the next couple of minutes talking, going back to the idea of our hyperlinks and making sure that anything that we put in an email that we want to send somebody to another website or perhaps a Google document or something like that that we're sharing, that this is done in a way that is both meaningful as well as easy to see and to identify. So we can go into the next slide. So the first thing is that you want to, as opposed to kind of cutting and pasting in links, as I was doing in the chat here, I will just note that Zoom does not allow us to use descriptive hyperlinks. We have to just cut and paste like the full URLs. But in an email, both that looks kind of cumbersome, and it also, again, when someone is using a screen reader, it forces them to read out that entire sentence in a way that is confusing to hear. You can imagine the HTTP / that a screen reader would read from a website. But instead, what we want to do is convert a passage of the sentence or paragraph that we're using that's descriptive and meaningful into a link that will take the person to the place we want them to go. And you're essentially just making that passage clickable. And I'm going to show you how to do that if this is not something that you're familiar with. So a few kind of examples on this side. Just what I was just saying, both of these, our bad and our good example, provide the same information, right? Please register for the community potluck by going to. Here's the link. This would be read as, again, the HTTP : //. So it looks, and this is a relatively short URL, but you can imagine the ones that are super long, right? Can look like a paragraph in some cases. Takes up a lot of room and just makes it a lot of noise for the eye when you're looking at that email. So instead, what you can do quite easily is just say, please register for the community potluck. And the community potluck that's highlighted and underlined here is a link that will take you directly to that same address. Another example we'll see in the next one is oftentimes we put the clickable text in the wrong place, right? Here, is the bad example where we talk about the fact that you can learn more about Vote as we go here. Here doesn't tell us where we're going. And really it's just kind of an additional word that's not needed in this situation. All we had to do was highlight the Vote as we go and use that as the clickable link, which makes it much more clear and identifiable where that we are going to be taken out to if we click on that link. So again, how to do it is in our next slide. So I'm all about, again, recognizable icons. That is what we're focused on. So what you see here at the bottom of your email is sort of like an icon for a chain link. That's, I think, my best way to think about what that looks like. And similar to what we did with the bulleted list, you'll highlight the words that you want to become the link that's going to take you somewhere. Once you highlight it and you click on the chain link button, a new dialog box pops open. That is, you're going to see something that looks like this. And here is then where you put in that longer, more cumbersome URL address. And then basically what that just did is behind the scenes, link the words from the email to this place that you want them to go without having to look at it in the body of the email. So it's kind of like a little bit of a shortcut, but it also is just, it makes that email communication much more readable and easy to follow. All right, I'm going to.
So the next concept we're going to.
Go ahead.
Okay. My internet's being just a little bit wonky, so I apologize for the lag. So the next concept that we're going to talk about for just a few minutes is meaningful image descriptions, or alt text. And again, as Michelle mentioned, if you have been to any of our previous sessions, you've most likely heard us talk about alt text. And just like in documents, emails do need to describe any images that are within the email. So alt text is a description of what the image represents. And this allows people who can't see the image to understand the meaning of it. You may want to consider including the description in the body of the email as well, depending on how important that information is. And if the image provides no additional meaning, you can mark it as decorative, or in the case of an email, it's a little bit easier to just remove it if it's not absolutely needed. So a couple of examples that I have here. Example one, a textbook. If you're a professor or you're sharing a book cover with other people, students or a class, or even just staff members or whatever, generic alt text for this particular image might be a textbook cover. Well, that's nice, and it's not necessarily wrong, but it doesn't really tell us anything about the cover, about the image that we're looking at. So specific alt text would be John Eastwood's Oxford Guide to English Grammar. The cover has a blue background with white text and multicolored circles at the bottom. This fully describes what it looks like to be sure that people understand what book they're looking at, especially if there's different versions or some such thing. So again, to describe the purpose of the image or the meaning of the image. In our second example, we have a woman wearing a white shirt and a hat. Well, depending on what the email content is, that generic alt text does not connect the woman to the information within the alt text or within the email. Like, who is this woman? Why do I care? Why is she in my inbox? So more specific alt text would be Martha Redbone, a Native American, African-American vocalist, songwriter, composer, and educator, will perform a virtual concert this Thursday. So the alt text, again, is providing a background meaning for the image, who she is. This would be pertinent if like sending out a press release, or again, a class notification, or just sending an email out for an upcoming event or concert. The alt text connects the image to the article or the information in the email, and that helps people understand why it's there and the meaning of the image itself. So for adding alt text, unfortunately, Gmail does not have the capability to directly add alt text to an image. I researched, I Googled, I looked it up, played around with it, just could not find it. So there's a workaround. The workaround is two parts. The first part, you have to open a Google document, insert the image into the Google Doc, and then you can either right click and select alt text from the options menu, as you see here on the screen, or you can keyboard shortcut Control-Alt-Y will open up the alt text dialog box. You enter your alt text into that dialog box and then hit OK. And then you want to copy the image from the Google Doc. Part 2 of the workaround is you go back to Gmail, you open up a new Gmail message, and then paste that image into the email body. You can do this by either right-clicking and then selecting paste or Control-V. I've had some very timely questions about adding alt text into signatures as well. And again, unfortunately, the concept is the same. There's not a really good way to do it. So you have to add the alt text into the image in a Google Doc and then copy it, come back over to Gmail, open up your Gmail settings, which is the little cog wheel at the top of the screen next to your name. And then this dialog box appears. There's a button that says See All Settings. And you click on that button and you get all of the settings that are available in Gmail. You have to scroll down, find the signature box, and then paste your image into the signature box. Again, right click and paste or Control-V. Once you've done that, you want to make sure to scroll to the bottom and hit Save Changes. That's the only way that I have been able to figure out as of right now to get alt text into an image in Gmail. So with all that being said, if you can avoid using images and only put the important information in the body of the email, that's going to be a lot easier on everybody. You don't have to worry about screen readers reading it. You don't have to worry about people missing information for whatever reason because they don't see the alt text. You don't have to worry about remembering to open up a Google Doc and put the alt text in and then copy and paste it into Gmail. Like, I understand that's just kind of cumbersome. And I hope that Gmail gets their stuff together and like can fix this at some point in the future. So anyway, that's the quick workaround. And that's, again, just a quick note about images. If they're not absolutely needed, I would consider removing them. So color is another thing that gets a little bit wonky. And in some of our, in some of the previous bad example emails that Michelle showed at the very beginning, they were like chock full of color for no particular reason whatsoever. You have to keep in mind that not everyone is going to be able to see color variations within your emails, and assistive technology is not going to differentiate color changes. Therefore, color cannot be the only means of relaying information. Now, this next screenshot is not necessarily directly pertaining to emails, but I think it's a great visual and I'll explain it. This is a screenshot from an actual football game that was broadcast on a major network just a couple of years ago, 2018 or 19, I think. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have the New York Jets in green uniforms. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have Buffalo Bills in red uniforms. Now, does anyone want to take a guess on what the most common form of color blindness is? Well, if you don't know where this is going, I'll tell you, it's red-green, which means that people cannot differentiate red and green, which means those people who were watching this football game saw this. It's all gray. And anyone who's ever watched a football game before knows that not being able to see the uniform color, it's very difficult to tell which team has control of the ball. So from what I understand, the network got quite a number of complaints about this particular game that had been broadcast. So like I said, not necessarily directly pertaining to email, but again, it's a great visual and it kind of helps you understand how different people might be able to perceive color that you use. So some guidelines for using color are stay with high contrast. The easiest to read and see is dark text on a light background. The second easiest for shorter passages, light text on a dark background. Reading long passages with light text on a dark background tires the eyes. It's a little bit more difficult to read. So with that being said, dark on light is obviously the best choice. You want to ensure that color is not the only means of relaying information. And I'll have a little example of this coming up on the next slide. And you can preview your email in grayscale in order to get an idea of how someone else might perceive the color that you use. So you can pretend you're going to print it, put it in print preview, change it to grayscale, and take a look. If you've changed colors on certain words, you can't tell the difference in grayscale, people with some sort of color deficiency or color blindness aren't going to be able to tell the difference either. So again, as with images, with color, if it's not absolutely necessary, I would say try to stay away from it, or at least use it very sparingly, use it very cautiously. So On this slide, we have a good example and a bad example of using color. It's the same sentence written twice, and the sentence reads, accessibility is the inclusive practice of removing barriers that prevent interaction with websites, media, and digital content. In our bad example at the top of the screen, the word accessibility is in red, and the words websites, media, and digital content are highlighted with yellow. Now, assistive technology is not going to pick up on either of those color changes. It just doesn't read color at all. If someone has a color deficiency or color blindness, they'll probably most likely be able to see a gray box behind the websites, media, and digital content where it's highlighted. However, being able to see the gray box may make those words very difficult to read. The color contrast may be low enough that those words will not be discernible. And they may or may not be able to see that the word accessibility is in red, because that's one of the most common color blindness. So our good example down at the bottom, the word accessibility is in a little bit of a darker red. The top red does not pass color standards by accessibility, the accessibility standards. The darker red does, but the word accessibility is also italicized. So even if the reader cannot see the red color, they can see that the word itself is italics, which lets them know that somehow that's emphasized or highlighted. The words at the end of the sentence, websites, media, and digital content, are still highlighted in yellow. However, those words are also in bold. So again, assistive technology would pick up on the italics and the bold. And even if someone is not using assistive technology, they would be able to see the difference in those words. So they would know that that's somehow highlighted or emphasized. So when you're using color to emphasize something, you have to make sure that that's not the only means of getting that information across.
Thanks, Kate. So that takes us through our 5 core principles. I think that there are some things that I want to sort of just note or mention that kind of relate to this. And then we will absolutely have some time for questions if people want to circle back to any of the things that we just quickly went through. So we can go on to the next slide. So I think that Kate was pretty clear on the pitfalls around images. I think that one thing that I've realized is that oftentimes what we are sharing in an image, I think we're just trying to make the email look more exciting. But if it truly is, like, I think the textbook is a great example. And if we want our students to make sure that they know what the textbook is they're reading, another way that you can do that is to provide a descriptive hyperlink that takes the person directly to the website for that book. So there's other ways that we can kind of think about how to use the accessible tools that are available to us. The next thing that I wanted to note is that oftentimes the way that you craft an email in the platform that you're using doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly how it's going to come through if somebody else is using a different email platform. So the good news is, right, is that for most of the things that we send on campus, we're sending to other colleagues or to students that have Oswego addresses. They can use Gmail. So that part of it, I think, is helpful. But I do think that it's important to note that you could put in things like a bulleted list, or you could go through all the workaround steps to provide alt text for an image. And somebody else that's using, for example, AOL, that may just come through as a static image and not have that additional information or those tools for the assistive technology to pick up on. And so I only mention that because that it is, I think, a reflection of the fact that different, email systems, it's like they aren't necessarily all speaking the same language. And so we have to at least be aware of that while we are sharing the information that we are. As such, I think that it creates an even greater reliance on trying to be really clear with the language that we're using, the way that we are chunking out our emails, those things that are just controllable on our end. The simpler that we can make that, the better. I do want to just, because I think that it is fairly common, especially for faculty on campus, to send emails directly from Blackboard, because it's a quick way, right, to get to your whole class. So I just want to highlight a couple of just slight changes that happen there. So we can go on. When you send an email from Blackboard directly, the icons look fairly similar for things like creating the structured content lists, or even below that chain link for inserting the hyperlink. They're in a different place though. They're on a top toolbar as opposed to kind of in the bottom right where we were showing them before, but you get the general sense that they are looking the same. So the process is the same in this case, where you highlight the information and then either choose the bulleted list or the hyperlink. One thing, and Kate, I didn't even get a chance to tell you this, you're going to be surprised to hear, is that images actually in Blackboard emails, there is no workaround. There's a direct way to be able to do this. The functionality is much better. So if you felt the need to send your class an image in an email, my version is say, go through Blackboard. In this case, we've got our Martha Redbone pick here again. I cut and pasted this directly into the email from Blackboard. And if you right click on the photo, this kind of menu of options comes up. You would choose image. And then on the next slide, we see that the edit image toolbar comes up. And we can put the image description right in there. And then it is in the email. So it's a little bit more direct from the Blackboard email system than it is using Gmail, just, in a regular window that we're working with. So that's good news. Now, I know we have talked about all kinds of things today, and I just want to note a couple of resources that are available to you. If you have not seen the digital accessibility website in the past, there you can find all sorts of information on our 5 core principles, as well as video and written tutorials on everything we talked about today, whether it's related to an email or other types of digital content that you're creating. There's 2 groups of folks that are listed on that website as well, the work group on accessibility practices and the fellows. Both of those groups are ready, willing, and able to assist as best as we can with anything, questions you've got going on. Coming up, I mentioned that each day during the spring breakouts, we are doing 1 or 2 different sessions related to accessibility. 2 that I'm going to point out, both of the Thursdays. So that's tomorrow and next Thursday. We are having just roundtable Q&As. We've done these in past breakout sessions where folks it's kind of like a working session, bring your documents. If you've started to play with this or you're just not sure, you want to circle back to something you've heard us talk about, we will have folks there that can assist you one-on-one. We break up into chat rooms so that people can kind of get that assistance that they need directly. Next week, we are also going to be talking about the current fellows. They are doing a panel discussion on what that program is, what their reflections are through the first half of the year. And then we're going to be looking at sessions on captioning videos, as well as a really exciting one next Thursday, talking about demystifying disability. And we've actually brought in a speaker from the SUNY system that's going to be facilitating that session. So we've got lots coming up on this topic, and we would love to see anybody join us for that. But with that, let me go ahead and maybe we can stop sharing slides and see if any folks have any questions for us on anything that we've talked about so far today.
Hey, I just had one question. Thanks so much for doing this. I'm not going to be here next week. If I wanted to, they'll all be recorded. And how does one get the recordings?
Yeah, great. That's probably a better question for John in terms of timing, but yes, all of the sessions are recorded. In terms of when they become then available for consuming, John, thoughts?
They will be available probably within no later than 5 o'clock tonight, but possibly within the next hour or so.
And we'd find them on
the schedule website.
Perfect.
Right on the SALT web page, click on the schedule.
I had an expansion question, moving away from digital to print, but are there also concerns about print pieces being accessible for people? I'm going to talk about use of colors and images and overlays and everything else. We create a lot in admissions and redo them every summer. And I'm just wondering if we should, put our pieces through some sort of, filter to make sure that they're as accessible as possible.
That's a really great question. And the basic answer to that comes down to the purpose of the piece. If you are strictly printing it, then no, you don't need to necessarily follow any of these guidelines. If you are putting it online for people to consume digitally, then yes, you need to follow the guidelines for the Word doc or PDF or whatever it is, whatever form it's in, to try to make it as accessible as possible for people to view it online. So that's, it's a little bit dependent on what the piece is and how you're using it, but that's the basic, easiest answer that I can give.
Kate, I will note one thing, right, is that everything we talked about with hyperlinks, that doesn't translate to a paper document, right? So if you put click on Vote Oswego, then and somebody gets that paper document, they don't know where to go. So we have to kind of think about things then in that different environment. Then you would have to actually have the full URL. So in some cases, you might, if you're creating it in both spaces where it's going to be emailed out as a PDF as well as, printed and given, copies, you need to kind of recognize that those two documents are meant for different spaces and should look a little bit differently as a result.
Right, yeah, absolutely. What we certainly do, we send a million emails to applicants. We do have one product, a custom view book, that is sort of the digital version of our printed admissions view book. And it's going through a redesign now. We just sort of approved the framework, and I'm wondering if we should have approved it without having one of you look at it.
Yeah, that one, I mean, definitely, because there's going to be a lot of images in there, I imagine, right?
Yes, it's students sort of based on their interest, what they're thinking of majoring in or what they most want to know about college. It creates a custom view book for them, but it is a digital view. It's not printed. It's something that electronically.
Are you working with a third-party company to do that? I'm familiar with the view book, but I don't know how it's created.
Yes, it is another. We can talk off. I don't need to take all the time, and this doesn't need to be recorded for posterity, probably. It is a company called Custom View Book.
Yeah, we can touch base really after the presentation.
Okay, great. I'll just send an email then to both of you, or who?
Kate, probably for this one.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Do we have any other questions? All right. Well, with that, thank you all so much for joining us today. We appreciate your listening and paying attention, and we'd love to see all of you again at one of our next sessions. But with that, we'll give you a couple minutes back of your morning to get ready for either what you're going on to next or the next session. Thanks so much.
Thank you.